My name is Amos Nadan. I'm the director of Moshe Dayan Center from Tel Aviv University. I'm honored to open this roundtable titled October 7 and its aftermath implications for the region, held in honor of Professor Bernard Lewis. All panelists here are from MDC. Joining us in a kind of alphabetical order, Brandon Friedman, Dr. Brandon Friedman, Professor Bruce Maddy-Weitzman, Dr. Harel Chorev, Dr. Ido Zelikovic, Dr. Yogev Elbaz, and myself. For those of you who are not familiar with the Moshe Dayan Center, we usually conduct deep research on the Middle East and Africa, exploring the region's complex historical, social, and political landscape. And many, in fact, most of our researchers are historians who believe that history matters and is essential, not only for understanding the past, but also for using it to analyze current events. Now, we are very fortunate to have the support of the late Professor Bernard Lewis. Since early days, he's, as you know, also the co-founder of ASMEA. Professor Lewis' legacy is deeply felt at MDC. Our seminar room bears his name. His work and personal archives are kept in our central library. And his commitment to the center continues with his son, Michael Lewis, who is with us. And he would be our chairperson as well. Michael is also a value member of MDC. He's part of the international board of the Dayan Center, and he continues to play an important role in supporting our work. So, in fact, I think that I'm the first MDC director who didn't have close relations with Professor Lewis, because even if I have a gray hair, I'm still too young for that. So I'm grateful to see Bernard's influence continue with Michael. And Michael, thank you very much for your support and for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
The crowd is a little smaller. I'm just going to talk a very few minutes about my father, and then we'll go straight into this event. And if you can't hear me, just raise your hand. So unlike the rest of the members of this distinguished panel, I'm vaguely knowledgeable about this subject. I've worked at APAC until very recently for almost 40 years, but I'm not a scholar or an academic. I'd like to thank the Dayan Center for sponsoring this event in honor of my father, and I'd like to thank ASMEA for having this also. ASMEA, of course, was founded by my father and Fouad Ejame almost 20 years ago. And of course, Fouad died just a few years ago, very young age comparatively. And thank you, all of the panelists here. The only one of you I've met previously is Dr. Nadan, who I met in Israel this summer, and who very kindly spent quite a bit of time showing me some of my father's archived material, including some stuff I wasn't even aware existed, stuff from my father's youth. It was just a revelation to me. My father's relationship to Israel, now people such as Itamar Rabinovich and Martin Kramer have a far deeper grasp of those ties. I just noticed exactly 50 years ago this year, September, that my father left London and the School of Oriental and African Studies and came to Princeton, half a year at the university, half a year at the Institute for Advanced Studies. And then just before my father left England for the United States, I left England for Israel. I spent almost 2 years in a kibbutz in northern Israel, Kfar Blum, where I met my future wife, and my father visited me there. And that was actually arranged by a couple of my father's longtime friends from the pre-war, Hanoch and Minoch Gifton, who sadly have died. And then after a couple of years, I was 23 when I started. I went to study college. I had a few earlier years doing other stuff. And so in 1977-78, my first year was at the Tel Aviv Overseas Program, thanks to Professor Rabinovich and then Chaim Shaked. And Asher Sasser at the time was a young teaching assistant. We were all much younger then. So in that year, I was at Tel Aviv University. It was the year that Sadat visited, I think it's probably worse. Shama, can't. I attended Tel Aviv. It was the year that Sadat visited Jerusalem. It was the Coastal Highway Massacre and the Camp David Accords during that entire year was at Tel Aviv. And there was a conference Tel Aviv held, which my father spoke at. My father obviously had a long-term relationship with Israel and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem with Teddy Kollek and with the university. And that relationship with Tel Aviv University grew over the years and the decades. And so it was to Tel Aviv University that my father passed on most of his extensive library, including these old documents, and directed most of his charitable contributions in this will and in the years before to the Dayan Center, the Lewis Program for Advanced Middle East Studies. But my father's association with Tel Aviv was actually before there was even a Tel Aviv University. He visited Tel Aviv first time pre-World War II with his parents. As a 22-year-old, he visited in Palestine, visited Tel Aviv, but couldn't go to Jerusalem because apparently it was too dangerous. And then over the years, especially these past 50 years, the 40 years from early 1970s till the mid-2010s, Israel was the place where he increasingly felt was at home, and Tel Aviv was his second home, and Tel Aviv University was where he was based. And that's what my father liked to do every year. He's actually buried right near where he used to live, in Tel Aviv. Growing up, I visited Israel a few times, before the 67 war, a couple times. And so, Zionism in our place was kind of, not activist, but we all Jews, Zionists, pro-Israel. But of course, my father had his academic. I always leave to others to assess his academic scholarship, subjects which brought much claim and also brought in much vitriol. Edward Said, and go online these days, and if you go on to Bernard Lewis, it's all these people accusing my father of all these things that are happening today as though he has some kind of hidden hand. And anyway, it's never been the job of me to be the bearer of my father's flames. Although when I discussed joining AIPAC a long, long time ago, I asked whether it would cause any problems for him career-wise. He was not at all unhappy with it at all. So I would just say that in his final days before he died, he was honored by the Israeli embassy as one of the 70 Americans who have strengthened Israel and its alliance with the United States. It was so fitting that his final award should be in this one. And I'm so actually proud to be associated with ASMEA and with Tel Aviv University, and I'm very grateful for them. So we're going to go on to the panel now. And Amos introduced them all, but if each one wants to talk for a sentence or two about what they're doing, before we get on to the panel. So we have a few general questions which all the panelists are going to answer unless they choose not to. And I guess we should kind of go up and down, that way there won't be a first and a last. So this one will start with, let me just repeat who the 6 panelists are, because I don't want to slight any of you. The panelists are Shalom, I'm so sorry. Harel Chorev, Yogev Elbaz, Brandon Friedman, Bruce Maddy-Weitzman, Edith Zelkowitz, and Amos Nadan, and of course all the doctors and professors. I never finished my dissertation, so I'll probably wait now. Okay, so the general question, we'll start, just answer or don't answer as you choose. So as historians, and you're all historians, not political scientists, I believe, what are the challenges involved in analyzing, writing about, and discussing the October 7th events? And what, as historians, can you provide added bonus to doing that? And if you're working on anything current related to this, please.
Okay, so I think that most of the people, or I hope that many of you know, like historians or work with historical material. And it's always the question of where we are on the timeline of a kind of, okay, the current would be the past, but when is it fine enough to discuss it? And I think that, and I started to say it before, what we are doing at the Dayan Center is we are trying to put the current on a kind of a timeline and to continue with that, also to speak about possibilities in the future. Now, we are not prophets. I'm not prophet, although my name is Amos. But we're trying to do something because we are part of the society, and we believe that it's not only for those who have theories in mind, have the answer. Now, about my project that's related to that, I have several projects that now I'm running, but I think that I'll speak about one specific that relates to October 7th. For many years, I'm researching economic sanctions in the Middle East, and I argue continuously that they are not effective. Not effective by, in fact, bringing a change that we hope to achieve, or that the sanctioning country is trying to achieve in the other country. And what we see from October 7th, that in fact, again and again, it worked the other way around. So if we're speaking about the Palestinian Authority, the sanctions in 2000, aiming at bringing a very, calm leadership instead of Arafat, who was regarded very aggressive, we got Hamas instead at the election. Now we had economic sanction on Gaza Strip after that. A positive sanction, it started by negative sanction, then also positive sanction, giving money, and eventually the result was totally different than anticipated. One of the things is to understand that the role of economics, in fact, is not the entire role. Like, it's not if you do this or that in economic terms, it will work, first of all. And second, that it might be that, in fact, giving money or not giving money serve the other way around. So if you are not giving or create burden, what would occur eventually is that those that you are sanctioning would say, we have to resist. We don't have to say that everything is okay, and this is exactly, I think, related to the responses of Hamas. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Harel Chorev. Last year I was talking here about the Ghazwe, the way I saw the Hamas raid on, of course, on the Gaza envelope, cities, kibbutzes, towns. Well, basically, Michael, that's a methodological question, and I think I come across with it all the time, including, 20 minutes ago with one of my friends. He's one of Israel's top commentator, Middle Eastern commentator on the IDF radio, and he already had this perspective regarding who won. And he said, it becomes sort of a cliche that Sinwar will be remembered as Salah ad-Din. But he's a journalist, okay? Very educated one, but a journalist. And for me as a historian, I know one thing. I mean, methodologically, that is a principle that guides me all the time. I use comparative perspective all the time. I compare stuff, I compare things that happen in history and try to see if I'm comparing between, apples and not watermelons and raisins. But the thing is that perspective, that's, without a perspective, you cannot determine anything. I will use even harsh words. I think it's almost ridiculous to try to determine from, in the current situation, how this whole thing will be taken in, years from now. So my answer to the same question that my friend said, yes, he will be remembered. There's Salah ad-Din, was, maybe, but maybe he will also be remembered as Haj Amin al-Husseini, the leader of the Palestinians during the mandatory period that was highly popular at the time, but after the catastrophe that he, in their own words of the Palestinian, the catastrophe that they experienced in 1948, he was, sent to the, maybe I shouldn't choose the word, how to describe it, but he was forgotten. He was forgotten, definitely forgotten. So I think we need perspective, and in any case, I'm pretty sure that we're winning at the bottom line on all fronts. So I think to judge October 7th from October 7th merely would be as if we will determine that the Americans lost the Second World War on Pearl Harbor's Day. Everybody will agree that it's unacceptable, of course. So perspective, and again, perspective, as a historian.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Itovic. I think that 1 year later on, as historians, we have the challenge also from the methodological point of view, the challenge of sources. Which sources are the best, are the reliable one that we can actually try to understand what was happening over there and what really Hamas wanted. I think that the 7th of October terror attack was one of the most documented terror attacks in our time. And as historians, we should be more open to what we used to call maybe in the past untraditional sources. Today we must use more and more audio, more and more media. We should rely more and more on videos that were uploaded into different social media platforms, especially to the Telegram. Just to share with you some of the numbers, on the 7th of October, there were more than 160,000 tweets and posts that were tweeted by Hamas members and Hamas fake accounts. From the 160,000 posts, maybe 25% of them were actually tweeted out by real people. So you can understand that also Hamas prepared its social media attack to this day. It was an attack not just on the soil, but also on the virtual cyberspace. I think that 1 year later, after the 7th of October, we can say already the following things. From the military perspective, although the Israeli army was surprised and received very strong hit on this day, Israel already succeeded and achieved, I think, tremendous achievement in this war. This is the first time, I think, maybe in the history of modern warfare, that a regular army beats a terror organization. Hamas as a military organization is barely exist anymore. It works on the platform of new drafts of mainly unarmed and unskilled warriors. All of his high-rank commands is already not with us, and I think the war of 7th of October will also give in the future a lot of work to the historians of military and war. And like I said, I think in order to understand the 7th of October as historians, we should be more open to use more untraditional sources, not just documents, but also audios, videos, and media. Thank you.
If I may, I'd like to talk a little bit about a project that I implemented in the weeks and months after October 7th. It was an unplanned project. It just fell into my lap, really. It was not a strictly academic work, but it was also partly the work in the field of, you could call it micro-military history, something that I had never done before. I was asked by a member of Kibbutz Alumim to document, to interview and to document exactly what happened that day on the kibbutz. And of course, when it started, when I heard about this, I said, well, where is Kibbutz Alumim? I didn't even know where it was. Kibbutz Alumim was one of the two religious kibbutzim located right next to Kibbutz Be'eri and right almost just behind, adjacent to Kfar Aza, of course, two of the worst hit kibbutzim that took place that day. I took on the project. I was looking for something to do. I mean, we were all at a loss, trying to understand what was going on. What can we do, civilians behind the lines, besides providing whatever aid we could. So I took on this project, and I learned a lot from it. I mean, the story briefly about the kibbutz is that the invaders, the Hamas invaders, did not succeed in getting to the members' houses. They did succeed in slaughtering 19 of the foreign workers there and taking some captive. One of them is still there. A Nepali is still there, is in captivity. And there were people killed, civilians on the road and even adjacent to the kibbutz, and some soldiers who joined in. There were casualties, but there were no fatalities on the kibbutz. There were no members' houses that were destroyed. And my goal was to try to understand why. How did this happen? How did it unfold there? And of course, as a historian, our job is always to make sense of complexity, to weigh different factors, to combine the big picture with acts by the protagonist. I would say that as historians, sometimes when we look at the past, there's almost inevitably there's a tendency to be determinist. Well, it happened, so this is why it happened. And maybe it could have happened another way, but in general, this is what happened. This is the most logical explanation, sort of things unfolding. Now, those of you who have been in combat, and those of you who know about war, know how much how skewed this can be. Now, of course, when the United States entered, when Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, when Churchill found out about it, he celebrated. That's it. The Americans are in. We won. We'll win. I mean, he didn't say we won, but we won. We'll win. It's over. The Americans will apply all of their might, their industrial might, their capacity, military capacity, whatever. Took another almost 4 years, but 3.5 years. But he was right. Now that's big picture. That's determinist, if you will. But still, what about agency? What about what people do on the ground? And certainly in microhistory, that's the case. And what struck me the most in my research was how easily it could have been different. How easily it could have been much worse that day on the kibbutz, beginning with a mistake by the Hamas invaders, according to the maps, captured maps on the bodies of the invaders. The commander one of the commanders who was killed that day. The invasion plan, where they came through the back of the kibbutz, through the fields, the invasion plan was designed to take the invaders, the first wave, there was like 10 or so, right to the center of the kibbutz where the arms depot was, the arms depot for the kibbutz security team. And most of the weapons for the kibbutz security team, there were 15 of them, were locked up in that storeroom, in the weapons depot. Hamas knew where it was. They were supposed to go there. Why? What happened? They didn't go there. They went to the front gate of the kibbutz instead. They went this way instead of that way. They stopped off on the way, just killed some of the foreign workers, and quickly shot up to the front gate where there was lots going on the road, on Road 232. 5-10 minutes later, the kibbutz security team hustled and got to the depot and took their weapons. It would have been completely different if they had gone according to the map. It would have been, horrendous disaster. Why did that happen? I don't know. A mistake. People make mistakes in war. Then on the ground, they got lost. They changed their mind. They forgot. I don't know. That was number one. And number two, 2 hours later, really, the climactic battle took place between the about 10 or so of the kibbutz security team and much more highly numbered Hamas, greater numbered Hamas units. I mean, face to face, 50 meters away, 40 meters away, 10 meters away, taking cover in the bushes, taking cover behind little cement blocks. I mean, bullets flying all around, soldiers getting wounded. One of them getting wounded down on the ground, and he said, "That's it. I can't pick up my gun. I'm wounded. For sure, the attacker will come and finish me off." He's waiting to die. Didn't happen. The guy never finished the job, and instead he was rescued and taken to safety. And those are the kind of chances. The chance actions that determine the outcome at that on that particular day, and those who were wounded and not killed. That's a matter of millimeters. That's luck. Yes, I'm finishing. So my conclusion is that chance and luck and agency, because of the bravery and the pluckiness of the defenders, combined to make Alumim a story that was worth telling. I published it in Tablet magazine, if anybody's would like to read the details. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I could just say one thing, it's my fault, I should have said, all the answers should be just a couple of minutes. Yeah. I'm not criticizing anyone, because I know all of you have much to say. And if the chance any of you don't have anything to say, and again, I'm not saying you shouldn't say, then if you feel it's totally beyond your province, then fine. But I'm not, in any sense.
So, my name is Yogev Elbaz, and I am researching Israel clandestine diplomacy, especially Israeli relations with Lebanon, from the 60s to the 80s. But I want to address this question, and I will do it briefly, very, very briefly. And I want also to address to methodological difficulty. As historians, and as in Israeli, it's very difficult and very hard to overlook this, to research this war, because we all, as Israelis, have family that, I think even in this table, everybody know someone that get hurt, or wounded, or died, or kidnapped, or been in Miluim, in the reserve army. So it's very, very difficult to separate the emotions from the expertise. Like, you need to put things in context, and you need to separate your emotions and your thoughts, and to put it in a new perspective, in contextual perspective. The war is in some ways it's a part of a bigger thing. So this is the main difficulty that I noticed. Thanks.
So everyone has spoken about the challenges and apologized for doing contemporary history, or history of events that are taking place now and took place not long ago. So I want to sort of advocate for it. A historian's job is to periodize, contextualize, synthesize, historicize, and sometimes even conceptualize. And I think that those jobs don't change just because the events are recent. It's incumbent upon us as historians to take recent events and try to do the same thing. I won't go into how we should periodize the current war and the events that have taken place since October 7th, but there are arguments to be made and debates to be had about how we do it. Do we focus on the Hamas-Israel dimension, the Israel-Iran dimension, the global issues playing out? And of course, there are historians argue about these things, and we will continue to do so. Let me just say 3 virtues of doing this kind of history. One is, doing history in real time, many of us have a very good feel, despite the warnings that Yogev mentioned. I think they're real and we need to be cognizant of it. In fact, a good historian realizes you can't escape those issues no matter what history you're doing. You can't escape who you are. The best of us manage to filter it out, but it's there. It's much harder. It's much harder in this case. But we also, the flip side of that is that we have a much better feel for the issues than someone who'll be working on them 150 years from now. We understand the period, the texture, the issues in a way that's much more instinctive than someone who 150, 200 years from now, or even 30 to 50 years from now will have to be understanding kibbutz alamim. Time and space, okay? I would say that how we understand the time and space is also something in real time that we have an advantage as historians. We understand the time and space, and that's similar to the first point. The third point has to do with scale, the way historians zoom in and zoom out. And here I'm referring to the combination or the synthesis of global, regional, and local. And here in Israel, maybe sometimes we lose sight of the regional and global because we're so focused on the local, but good histories take into account not just the very local micro issues, and Bruce, this is no knock to what you're doing. All history is good history. But a good history synthesizes these micro, local, regional, and global. And I think that there's a lot to be said for taking a first stab at that even now. I hope in 30, 50 years from now, when they get all of these documents they've seized from Hamas and Gaza and all of the documents they're going to seize in Lebanon, and scholars have access to them, that we'll learn more, and we build on what some of us are doing now. But that shouldn't stop us from doing what we're doing now. Thank you.
Okay. Next question, and we're going to start with you and go this way this time.
Brendan.
Shorter answers, only because there's so much and limited time. Although I'd actually be interested in hearing all of you talk for much longer. Has October 7th changed any of your perspectives on either historical or current issues? What's changed since then? And is it kind of a permanent change, or is it something that's going to just kind of be another blip?
So since I just spoke, I'll be brief on this. I think for me, the biggest impact of the event was it was a reminder to be modest. I think to a certain degree, all of us in Israel, there's this big soul searching about what's known as the conception, about what Hamas was or wasn't up to prior to October 7th. And I think, and I won't get into all of the details, but I think it's a reminder to all of us doing this kind of conceptual history that we need to be modest, to question ourselves, and realize that maybe what we know with certainty we don't.
When I researched my late research, my PhD, I studied the events that led to 1982 Lebanon war. And I was very criticized upon this war. 1 month after the war erupted, Menachem Begin published a paper in Ma'ariv newspaper and said, in favor of a choice war, in favor of war that you're not compelled to do it. And it was very criticized in Israel. But today, I think we need to rethink in it, to reconsider maybe we need to go to war even before we are compelled to do it, preventing war. And if we do it in Gaza, the whole thing was... if we do it in Gaza before October 7th, the whole picture will be changed. Thanks.
Yeah, I would just echo Brandon's comment about modesty, being modest, and we should beware of overconfidence in our ability to deter one's adversary. And I think that this was the conception, the belief that the Palestinians were deterred. They didn't have enough agency. They couldn't do what they wanted to do. And so we could relax. I was shocked by October 7th like everyone else, and that's one of my conclusions.
Well, I want to share with you a thought of mine. I think that we also should have not just modesty, but sometimes also intellectual courage. Sometimes we are writing and saying what our friends and colleagues want to hear, and we are sometimes imposing our political beliefs as historians on our work. I think one of the lessons of 7th of October is also from the methodological point of view, is not just to rely on a political leadership on the words of the politicians, not just to listen to the speeches of Khaled Mash'al and President Mahmoud Abbas, but to try to understand how society works from the below, to combine between the political and the social history. If one wants to understand what is Hamas all about, I think you should be more aware to what's going on inside in Hamas forums, to try and get inside documents of Hamas, to try to understand how they indoctrinized themselves, and from there to try and understand with a lot of modesty is on research. And why I say intellectual courage, because sometimes it's also very hard for us to say publicly, well, we maybe analyze things wrongly. We didn't saw all of the picture, not all of the materials were in front of us. And I think all of us as historians should learn a lesson, especially when we are talking about or trying to understand what was the conception of the Israeli government and what this conception was all about. This is, I think, maybe part of the tikkun we should do.
Well, last year when I spoke here, just a few weeks after the October 7th, I think it was, 2-3 weeks or so, my strongest impression was, as a self-criticism, was that although I was following social media and saw their murderous intentions brought to me, you know, on a silver plate with all sorts of symbols, you know, Jewish head inside of a makluba dish served as the Friday traditional dish, and all sorts of horrible things. And I just couldn't, you know, take it down from here to here, or from here to here, to be more precise. To say what we see here is a dehumanization that will have a bottom line. It will not just stay on the cloud somewhere. It will materialize. And what I was, you know, disturbed with during this year is, again, how could I do things differently? How could I understand things differently? Even as someone who was relatively, you know, alerted by what he saw, but I just couldn't imagine. So it's still my strongest impression and conclusion from October 7th.
Mine is very sure to take more seriously founding documents. Like, we used to read the Charter of Hamas and believe that, okay, it's nice, but it's kalam fadi, like a meaning of empty words. It's not really what they mean. And most of the people who dealt with that, like specialized in Hamas, this is what they used to say. It's a kalam fadi. There's no big difference between Fatah and Hamas. And what we realize, that what's written there is what they meant. And for that, I think he's not here, Professor Meir Litvak from Allianz and Dayan Center, he used to say that. We said, listen, all the rest are saying that you are wrong. He said, no, read it carefully, and he was right. One of the things is really to take more seriously texts that are influential. It was also the case with discussing the Palestinian charters of the PA, that people say, they're not serious or not. If it's written, take that seriously. Thanks.
just one note. I think part of it is the pushback that we all experience in, I don't know how many decades, against essentialism, okay? Against essentialism. Okay, so essentialism is not a good thing, but, I mean, if you read it, if you see it over and over again, not to take it to the other side, because if you take it to the other side, you sometimes miss it big time.
Again, I'm not going to ask specific questions to specific ones of you, and then at the end, nearer the end, we'll go back to an all-general question. But if anyone has really something, massive to add to, then please add. I guess the first one to Dr. Maddy-Weitzman is the shifts in Maghreb policies that have emerged since October 7th. Although I noticed that the Washington Institute just had a delegation coming back from Morocco.
Okay, let me provide some just a very brief context. The Maghreb, of course, Maghreb states, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, they are on, of course, the sort of periphery of the Middle East core and have been involved in Arab-Israeli affairs in different ways. In terms of background and orientations, as you know, Tunisia and Morocco were generally pro-Western in orientation, anti-radical Arab nationalism, anti-Abdel Nasser, with legacy of Jewish communities, of cooperation with Jewish communities. And when we get to the 90s and the breakthrough with Madrid and Oslo, they joined into the peace process and formed open diplomatic relations with Israel and economic ties, etc. Opposite that stood Algeria, representing revolutionary anti-colonialism, radical nationalism, extreme support for Palestinians going back to the PLO, and as they served as a model for the PLO. In the 1990s, Algeria was beset by a terrible civil war with Islamist radicals, and they joined the American War on Terror, and there was hope that this would change their relationship with Israel. That didn't happen. So what about since October 7th? One thing in general I think was common across the region, public opinion was in North Africa, was and is massively hostile to Israel. No surprise there. Al Jazeera dominates the discourse. Unfortunately, regarding Morocco, we see a real downward shift in support, in openness to Israel. If we take before the Arab Barometer polls, which showed that that 30% of Moroccans supported normalization, that's a lot in the Arab context, pre-October 7th. Now, according to the survey, it's only like 13%. Morocco witnesses regular noisy demonstrations, demonstrations which say Sinwar is a shaheed, Hania is a shaheed. The football stadiums are packed with anti-Israel venom and rhetoric. Those journalists and writers like Tahar Ben Jaloun who dared to criticize Hamas were roasted on social media, threatened, etc. And with regard to governments, I mean, here we have a unique situation. Morocco and Israel developed a very close strategic relationship. This goes back half a century, really, but it really took off with the Abraham Accords and post in the last few years. We had before October 7th a whole slew of visitors from Morocco, academics and business people and culture, and I mean the sky seemed to be the limit. Well, all of that is frozen now. All of that. all that except in the defense area. In the defense area, as far as I understand, as far as what I read in the press, the Israeli-Moroccan relationship is firm and solid, because for Morocco there's one issue only, and that is the maintaining and controlling the Western Sahara, sovereignty over the Western Sahara, and defending itself against Algeria. And Israel has provided advanced weapons in that regard, and continues to do so. So as far as I know, the strategic relationship is there, and I believe that the opposition in Morocco understands that. So even though they call for no normalization and boycott and this and that and this, everyone knows that's Western Sahara is the red line, and Israel supports helps Morocco on that. So we not going to throw that out. The other thing is the regime still has relatively broad legitimacy among the people, and that's unlike in Algeria. The irony of Algeria, which is totally supportive of Hamas, and Sinwar even mentioned at one point in one of his interviews, saying that they're saying, when he was asked about all the casualties, all the price that the Palestinians were paying, he said, well, like in Algeria, they had 1 million martyrs, so we're going to have if we have to have 1 million martyrs, we'll have that too, but in the end we'll win. We'll emulate what Algeria did against the French. The Algerian discourse is so vile that they accused the Zionists of leading a campaign against the Algerian Olympian who there was a gender issue, you may recall, in boxing, and was she eligible to, and they said, oh, this is the Zionist conspiracy, they're trying to undermine Arab and Muslim women in Algeria. I mean, it's sick kinds of things. The irony in Algeria is that no demonstrations are allowed. No demonstrations are allowed in Algeria because the regime lacks legitimacy, and they're afraid that the demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations, will move out, glide into anti-regime demonstrations. Tunisia's a similar story to Algeria, because they allow demonstrations, and the authoritarian regime there needs the legitimacy, and and the left as well in Tunisia uses anti-Semitic rhetoric and aligns itself with the Islamists. So it's not a pretty picture in North Africa, unfortunately.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Elbaz about Lebanon. Given Israel's history in southern Lebanon from the 60s to the 2000s, can you put that into context, the current conflict in southern Lebanon? And do you think it's possible to think about Lebanese politics, Hezbollah leader? I remember, I was in Israel in the 70s, and back then it was the PLO in southern Lebanon and the rockets and the terrorist attacks. And then after Sharon, then there was Operation Litani. President Carter kind of forced Israel out. And then there's been one after the other, these conflicts, including the 82 war, which basically led to Hezbollah being there. And then you've had these other wars in 2006. And so there's a war, and maybe a UN involvement and destruction of weaponry, and then they basically just rebuild, and you're worse off than you were before. So how do you think these things happening now in Lebanon?
Oh, it's a big question, but I will try to arrange things. First of all, Israel is in a catch-22 scenario in Lebanon, because on one hand, and Dr. Naor spoke it today, in one hand, it's a really live memory still in Israel, the security belt and the bad experience of the IDF in South Lebanon, especially in the late 90s, and the bad experience in 2006. And Lebanon is considered in Israel a swamp, quagmire, or even Bermuda Triangle of the IDF. This is on one hand. But on the other hand, from Israeli perspective, Israel did fought in Lebanon and did retreat from Lebanon in 2006, and even with international mechanism of 1701, and it didn't work either. So we cannot win in Lebanon. If I may, I think the whole perspective and all perception of Israel in the Middle East should be considered or reconsidered, because in the last 15 years, Israel is disengagement from the area. Like, we try to manage the conflict with the Palestinians with no advantages, with no negotiations, sorry. And we didn't do any deep changes, for good or bad. And we surrounded itself, Israel surrounded itself with walls and fell in love in Villa in the Jungle, its own image of Villa in the Jungle. And in October 7th, the old Middle East knocked up the door. So it's very, very hard if I try to analyze it in Israel perspective, how we can go from here, especially in Lebanon. As I said, we are in catch-22. As to your question on Hezbollah, unfortunately, I don't see any political power in Lebanon that overtook Hezbollah. Even today, after his harsh losses from Israel, I don't see anyone, and I don't see even anyone that wants, because until the political system of Lebanon will be changed, the Zo'ama system, until then, nobody can replace Hezbollah. I wish I am wrong, and we will see it.
And do you think Hezbollah can change, or if Iran wasn't so involved, it changed them, or the Hezbollah we see is the one? It's just
Yeah,
they
I
don't have the
didn't
power.
understand. Again?
Is Hezbollah, the PLO changed? Is Hezbollah at all likely to change, or is it?
No, I don't think so, because the revolutionary part of Hezbollah is one of his main pillars, so it's not going to change. Hezbollah is a hybridic organization. He's half Shiite and half Lebanese. But when he needs to choose, he probably will choose the Shiite revolution, not the Lebanese one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
For Dr. Friedman, sure, just one question, then we'll go back, and then at the end. So we're not doing a math
Yes,
question.
I'm going to put a provocation to the panel. I suggest to you that Hamas has won this war. It knew perfectly well on October 7th that was not going to conquer Israel. But it did two things. One, it stopped any further progress on the Abraham Accords. And that was why they did it just at that time. Number two, they knew that Israel, Netanyahu, or anybody else was going to have to answer that. And that would mean lots and lots of civilian deaths, mothers and babies and old people and all that. And that has had a big effect. Some of you have mentioned that effect on the other Arab countries. But it's had, let me tell you, a big effect here in the United States. I've seen it in my own community. What does a great American public see, brother? They see these civilian deaths. Now, everybody here in this room knows there's a lot more to it than that, but most Americans don't. And in that respect, they have succeeded in expanding what was already a beginning, like the European left, the American left was always tending anti-Israel, but now it's gotten a big boost.
Thank you for that. I wouldn't disagree, but maybe at the end we'll do like an assessment of long term. So for Dr. Friedman, and we'll just segue slightly, how would you say the inter-Arab politics have changed because of this, and particularly the Saudi-Israeli normalization, which looked like was happening at the very cusp of the beginning of the war? Do you think the Saudis will still go ahead with that, or is it just part of their U.S. security deal that they want?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I guess before I answer it, I do want to relate to the comment. I mentioned earlier that I think when we think about October 7th and what's happened since, we need to think about it on 3 levels at least, and zoom in and zoom out. A lot of our comments have been coming from an Israeli perspective. We can't escape that. We're Israelis living in Israel. And what we care about most in the aftermath of the shock and trauma of October 7th, obviously, is returning security, a sense of security at home. And most of the conversations at home revolve around that notion, restoring confidence that we can be safe again in our homes. And that might seem, I guess, narrow-minded or given all of the issues at play here, but I think it's only human. But as historians, I think we have to look beyond the immediate local issues. There are regional issues. Israel's place in the region during a period of what was de-escalation from the Abraham Accords in September 20th to October 7th, in which much of the talk from early spring 2023 to October 7th was about Israel potentially normalizing with Saudi Arabia on the back of a US-Saudi reset and perhaps security guarantee. And then obviously there are global issues. Israel's image throughout the West, not just in the US, not just on US campuses, but in campuses throughout what's typically referred to as Europe, Canada, North America, whatever is considered part of the West these days, parts of Asia. And that's an issue. And of course, there's a broader issue that no one has really talked about yet, which is Israel and the United States, and how this war and the way Israel and our leadership have gone about conducting the war has affected the relationship with the United States, which is a huge issue. We could spend hours just talking about that. So the issue you raised is legitimate. It's important. And I don't want you to feel that we're giving it short shrift, but it's impossible to cover everything. I want to address the Saudi issue. I think Saudi-Israeli normalization was perceived in Tehran as the return of the US to the region. That the trend over the last 13 to 14 years was that the US was trying to engineer a graceful exit from the Middle East, or at least a reduced role in the Middle East. And that the Saudi-Israeli normalization was part of that exit, okay? And some people believe that Tehran saw it as a US defense guarantee for Saudi Arabia, as a US return to the region. And so while Tehran might not have planned or executed the attack, they saw an advantage to be exploited. If Sinwar wanted to carry this out, then this would be good for Tehran because it would scupper this potential US-Saudi defense pact, which would mean the US would have a much more central security role in the region moving forward. Now, we're going to have to understand, today US-Saudi defense agreement means something completely different. Now many people talk about the US role in this war as being US credibility or reputation on the line. Now, I'm not sure that's the right way of looking at it or not. I think my reading of US interests is currently the US has bigger interests elsewhere. But right now if people believe that the US credibility is on the line in how it conducts itself in the Middle East today, that all of a sudden becomes a major US interest. So the Saudi-Israel normalization issue is incredibly important. It's probably very far-fetched right now and unrealistic. And many people would argue that Israel's in the midst of a war with Iran. And until its war both with Gaza, Lebanon and Hezbollah and Iran reaches some kind of resolution, perhaps it's premature to be discussing potential Israel-Saudi normalization. But I don't think we have the luxury of thinking about these things in sequence. They often happen in parallel.
And to state the obvious, we have elections in a couple of days in America, and whoever's elected, you really don't know what's going to happen to US foreign policy. I mean, people think, well, Trump's going to be so pro-Israel, but it's not necessarily Trump's going to be so pro-Israel. It's not necessarily that Kamala Harris is going to be so different from Biden. It may look that way, but none of the people, if you look at the people around them, that's another matter, but what the actual presidents do. So for Dr. Chorev, so what does the Hamas losses mean, their leadership losses mean? Is there any kind of defeat for Hamas ideology? And are there any potential Palestinian, I mean, is there a partner for peace? You know, in the early 90s, we looked like we were getting close to peace, or at least some kind of resolution. So.
Well, I guess all of you are aware of this claim that say you cannot defeat Hamas. Hamas is an idea. I strongly disagree with this sentence. There is an idea. I'm not interested in, well, I am interested in the idea, as you all know, but I'm not interested in defeating the idea. I'm interested in defeating the genocidal organization of Hamas. That's it. That's what I'm interested in, and that's a totally different thing. Taking the weapon from the idea beholder. That's to begin with. Now, regarding what happened to Hamas leadership, you know, precision attacks are, in fact, quite more scientific stuff than we usually think of. People speak in terms of symbols. Oh, it was very important for the organization. He's a symbol and so on and so forth. No, it doesn't work this way, actually. It works on a, I would define it, a network logic. For example, when Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh, it didn't kill just a symbol. It didn't kill just the guy, the leader who was in front and leading this notorious prayer you probably all remember on October 7th, which is important, by the way, as a symbol. It also cut off a very important pipeline between Hamas and Iran. Khaled Mashal, for example, would not fit in this rubric because he has very bad relations with Iran. So once you cut Haniyeh off, you hurt Hamas. Hardly. And the same with others. Now, in regard to Sinwar himself, that was extremely important. And I think anyone who expects to see the outcome immediately should wait. Should wait. It doesn't happen on one day. I mean, the ramifications of this issue. Why? Because Hamas, its DNA, is basically a very decentralized organization, like most of the Muslim Brotherhood organization. They are, you know, based on the Shura, namely considering, debating, and reaching to a ijma, namely a consensus at the end of the day. So there is a whole process of decision-making that is based on a decentralized structure. Now, what happened to Hamas since October 7? It's that it became a very extremely centralized organization, de facto. I mean, where it was important, namely in the Gaza Strip. When the brothers, the Sinwar brothers, took more and more power from their counterparts that either were killed or just forced to answer or to work according to this new centralized structure. Like a mafia. How do we know that? There was a very interesting letter written by Rafa Salame, that was captured by Israel, written in April, last April, where you see that he's addressing the two honorable Sinwar brothers as if they were kings or something. You understand that something fundamentally changed within Hamas. That's not its typical DNA. It doesn't work this way. So you understand it became a very centralized hierarchical organization during the past year. So once we killed the Sinwar, it opens it opens new options. Indeed, we still have his brother, who is a menace, but hopefully we will get to him too. And then we stay more or less with two figures that someone may consider as you know, as important. One is Haddad, the head of the Northern Brigade, the Gaza Brigade, and Shabane, the head of the Rafah Brigade. But these precision killing are extremely important, and we need to wait and see how it will change Hamas strategy, because at the end of the day, those leaders don't grow on the trees, as we say in Hebrew.
Thank you. Dr. Zalkowitz? If you could let me do 5 more minutes, and I had a couple of general questions which might tie in to what you wanted to ask. For Dr. Zalkowitz about the Hamas-PLO connection, I tied into that one.
Yes, thank you. Regarding to the Hamas-PLO relationship, I think this war also changed not fundamentally, but it changed the way that Hamas perceived the PLO. What actually not Muhammad Yahya, the older brother, Yahya Sinwar did in 7th of October, in many ways, and I don't think about an ideological options, but I think now it's time also to discuss real politics. I think that in many ways, and I said unfortunately, Yahya Sinwar in 7th of October killed the two-state option in the mind of the majority of Israelis. The support in the two-state solution in Israel have declined fundamentally after we saw the barbaric attack of 7th of October. That's also created a lot of impact about the nature of relationship between the PLO and the Hamas. Before of the 7th of October, they were actually two schools of thought inside Hamas, but the one that Khaled Mashal led said that Hamas is getting prepared for the next stage. What actually Hamas wanted strategically is to take the PLO from within, to take it from, first the PLO even bigger, they thought in a bigger sense. And that's why Khaled Mashal, for example, didn't hold any official position inside Hamas, but just received this unofficial title of the head of Hamas in the in outside, somewhere outside Palestine. Today, I think that Hamas leadership, both in Qatar, but mainly in the Gaza Strip, understand that without once again reaching hand to the Palestinian Authority, Hamas will not survive anymore. Although Israel already disarmed and broke down Hamas military capabilities, you must understand that Hamas civil structure is still alive. It's weak. It's like my friend Harel said, it's functioning in a very decentralized way, but it's still on the ground. And Hamas is first and foremost ideology. And you cannot kill ideology, but you can kill people that are holding this ideology. This is something that we also bear in mind all time long. So I think now we're going to see efforts by Hamas to renew the dialogue with the PLO, because Hamas feels that if the PA, and we don't know what sort of the PA it's going to be, reformed, a new one, will enter the Gaza Strip and will take the responsibility of building it after the war, that will going to provide the movement for Hamas, sort of a small windows of opportunities to maybe later on to survive and to enter the PLO and to still become or still remain member of the Palestinian political system. This is from Hamas' point of view. I will add just one sentence from the Israeli point of view. I think that after breaking Hamas military capabilities, the state of Israel, it doesn't matter which government going to be in the future, should not let this sort of political movement, Hamas, to exist anymore. That's my perception. Thank you.
Thank you. For Dr. Nadan, and this is the last of the specific questions, does the Arab world have the will and capacity to contribute to Gaza post, if there is a day after, the reconstruction? And if Gaza does rebuild, how does Israel prevent anything happening again, like it just happened?
I think that the end of your question is the most important thing. We understand that when money went to Gaza, much of it went to terror. Now the question is what to do, because it's clear that money is going to be transferred to Gaza Strip, to reconstruction of Gaza Strip, but there is the book by Mary Anderson, Do No Harm, by how to channeling money to areas like Gaza, and in fact, there is still significant problem to solve this. So I'm not seeing people are keen to donate money because of also being afraid in states of being supporting terror. Now, if you go to numbers, so there are different assessments of how much it would cost to reconstruct the Gaza Strip. People would speak to you about several a billion, but now the assessment are $50–60 billion. It's a lot of money. The Arab world cannot do that by itself. There is no motivation to do that, and there is not enough money to do that. If you go and look at the support that going from Arab countries to other countries on a yearly basis, there are need here for big players to also to play, whether governments or UN, IMF, and so on. So I think that there is motivation in the Arab world to assist, to solve things, but there are also a fear that money would in fact go to the bad direction. Now, if you look at all the big donors, like Saudi Arabia is the biggest donor in the Arab world, the interest of Saudi Arabia is not to see Hamas again. And now, when Hamas still exists, I don't see how money continue to move. It's really depend on the result of that war. Now, last comment is you've mentioned, sir, about you say we are losing, not winning. The war is not ended. And the war is between Israel, first of all, and the surrounding countries or entities. Israel, I believe, should not care what winning or not winning in the media. It's important, but it's not the rule of the game. Last note is that we have to remember historically that according to Egypt, they won the 67 war and they won the 73 war. It doesn't matter, they lost. So there is significant difference between what happened on the ground and what happened outside or spoken by different countries. It looks like Israel did significant attack on Hamas and Hezbollah, and that they are weakened than ever.
So thank you. Thank you to the Dayan Center for doing this, and to ASMEA, and thank you everyone for coming.